Hi and welcome back to PDA Dad UK. In this episode, myself and Chris Lee Smith from the Grumpy Gits will be interviewing the amazing Shani Dhanda, who you'll know from TV shows such as Rip Off Britain, Jeremy Vine and also Loose Women. As I say, welcome back to PDA Dad UK. Before I go on any further, can you go hit like, hit subscribe and ring the bell? You'll always know when I've got new content coming up. More than that, you'll be helping me hit that 10,000 subscriber mark, which would be a huge, huge milestone for me. So please go and do that now. As I say in this episode, interviewing the amazing Shani Dhanda. Now, you will know Shani from TV shows such as Jeremy Vine, Rip Off Britain. She's on Loose Women. She's a mainstay of TV and a fantastic broadcaster. More than that, she's an entrepreneur and she's also a passionate advocate for disability rights and disability advocacy. With the Grumpy Gits, we got to sit down with her, and this is obviously the extended version of the interview that was on the Grumpy Gits show from this week, so you can go and check that out here. We got to sit down with Shani and really talk about the importance of representation in the workplace, in life in general, and especially in the media. So without any further ado, we will hand over. This was the interview we did with Shani. Thank you, Shani, and thank you for being on. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Great to be here.
It's just, I love meeting people like you who've got, for those who don't know, we always have a bit of a pre-chat before we get into the actual recording of the interviews and stuff like that. You've got such a refreshing attitude toward, I think, life in general, but seeing how your passion for disability and disability employment's been a big thing for you. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. I really struggle to enter the job market, and lots of disabled people do. It's pretty crap because there are loads of us that can and want to work, but it's not our conditions and impairments that are stopping us. It's other people's bias. I'm out to change those perceptions. I work with lots of different businesses and brands and really help them to transform the experience for their disabled employees and their customers as well.
I think probably a good idea is to start with, who you are and what it is that you actually do.
I'm a very proud Brummie. I have to start with that, but I live in London. I have a short stature as a result of the condition that I was born with. And I'm also a South Asian woman. So I experience the world in a really unique way.
Kind of a minority within a minority within a minority in the UK.
As you can imagine, we're always told that, the more marginalized you are, the more difficult your life is. And I just didn't want that for me. Actually, all the things that make me who I am, they're bloody brilliant. Like, it's so cool being me and I really love it. And I'm sick of this narrative like that. If you're a person of colour or if you're a woman or if you live with a condition and impairment, then it's all doom and gloom. So I'm on a bit of a mission to change that, but also just to make the world that we live in more accessible and fairer for everybody. So how I do that is, as a consultant, I work with companies and organisations to help them to become more inclusive. I'm also a social entrepreneur. So I'm launching an app to help disabled people save money because, as we all probably know, life costs a lot more when you live in an inaccessible society.
I have a running joke with Tigger Pritchard's a guy I do a lot of work with, and we do a podcast together. And we had a running joke of, it started on the Grumpy Dads when Chris and I interviewed him and did a thing with him. He uses blue tack as a sensory tool, as like a stimming aid, sort of socially acceptable. And we came up with the idea that we need to release sensory blue tack, which is basically exactly the same product but costs 3 times as much because we got the word sensory on there.
You've hit the nail on the head there. That's what absolutely happened. We need certain products and services. Like, I just bought a new manual wheelchair. It was nearly £8,000. I put off buying it. It took me 5 years because I had COVID in the middle and that had loads of delays. And then I had to wait for a wheelchair services appointment, but the waiting list was like 9,000 people just for them to tell me they couldn't help me. I have an article out today in the Metro and I added up all my extra costs last year. Does anyone want to take a guess at how much they were?
I'm guessing 15, 20,000.
Far off.
Oh.
Chris?
£20,001.
So it was just under 13,000. Well, no, just over £13,000.
That's unbelievable.
That's crazy.
So I was at uni when they had this idea. I was like, well, if students can get a discount, why can't we as disabled people? Because I also grew up with the guilt of watching my parents shell out loads of money. They had to pay £7,000 for an electric wheelchair just so I could go to a mainstream secondary school. And as a child of an immigrant, you're very aware of the fact that you don't have generational wealth and money is tight. And not that my parents ever made me feel guilty about it, but that's just your norm. I just don't think it's fair that disabled people have to pay more to try and live the same lives as others, but they have less or no choice.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I've been on this whole journey to launch this app. I really struggled to get investors. Everyone kept telling me that my idea wasn't a business and it's a charity because that's how people view disability. I got investors, then I lost them all when the pandemic hit. So then I had to start again, scrape myself back up off the floor, and now hopefully this year I will be able to launch and tackle the root cause of the issue, which is to help disabled people reduce their outgoings.
I'm going to ask straight out then, if anyone wants to be involved with that, how can they get in touch with you to do so? Because I think there's people probably watching who think, love the idea.
Yeah.
We want to invest. We want to be part of this. How can they do so?
Please contact me at hello@shanidhanda.com. And if there's other people out there that have got contacts with retailers, please hook me up. I thought the hardest thing would be is to get the retailers on board. It was the easiest thing. The hardest thing was to get the investment. Even though this is social good, this is tech for good, I'm helping the government do their job essentially. I'm also a broadcaster, so you can find me on shows such as Rip Off Britain, Loose Women, Jeremy Vine on Five. So look, everything that I do is all about trying to increase accurate portrayal of disabled people and some of the communities that I belong to, like, being a South Asian woman, we don't see many of them on TV either. But I'm also really passionate about intersectionality because I'm really sick of this narrative that we're all marginalized. We're not, we're over excluded. How can nearly 15 million people be underrepresented?
Have you ever seen the film Bug's Life?
Yeah.
He makes the point. The ants outnumber them like 100 to 1. And if they ever work that out, there's no stopping them. And I feel like it's the same for this community, these, what you say, marginalized communities. If they actually just put differences aside and went, you know what, if we stuck together and did something, there's no stopping us.
We had this conversation actually a couple of days ago. And I think the reason being is that money's involved. And that's the reason why, to make things accessible for the disabled community to use the way that able-bodied do, it would cost a fortune. And I think that's why the reluctance and the exclusion comes in, is because if they did and they put all these things in place, it would cost millions and millions. And I think there's something behind where they're fighting against exclusion because it will hit their bottom line.
That's why I tell people that this is an investment because accessibility benefits everybody. I was at an event a couple of months ago with Sadiq Khan and I just stuck it on him. I said, I would never have moved to London if I'd have ever known it would be this difficult to live here. He said, when I started to put lifts in the tube stations, I thought I was doing it to help, people with mobility challenges and disabled people. And he said, but actually, I got the vote of loads of parents because they could use it for their pushchairs. People going to the airport with their luggage. And I was like, okay, so you get it. So there are people now that out there that understand accessibility benefits everybody.
So many inventions that have come about have been invented for disability use. And then it's like, oh, actually, that electric can openers.
Yeah.
It's like that was initially for disabled people to be able to open cans more easily if they've got limited function in their hands or arms. Suddenly it's like, oh, why aren't we all using that? That's so much easier. And
so much easier is the able being lazy and not using a manual.
I think so much is driven by outright laziness.
I think it is.
Yeah. I think the other issue though is that we're too caught up on language, and because disability is seen as such a dirty word, nobody wants to adopt and call themselves a disabled person because we know so many people also don't know anything about the social model, which talks about the fact that, it's not our conditions and impairments that disable us, it's barriers and bias. I really feel that we as disabled people, we need to move on from this. We need to stop the infighting because just imagine what a collective voice that we could be then.
I think there's almost a deliberate, is almost like if we keep them fighting amongst each other, it's all fine and it won't bother us.
Do you think there's a short-sightedness? Obviously, it would cost money. to put certain things in place. But it's an investment. And as you said, there's 15 million disabled in the UK. That opens up a whole new market.
Yeah.
And those that come forward first will reap the benefits before anybody else.
When we look at it, like, it wasn't that long ago that disabled people were still being institutionalized.
Yep.
We still have a large generation that only views disability as that, as some sort of deficit. You know, I went to a special needs primary school. I was segregated. So people my generation perhaps didn't even go to school with disabled people. So really, I think the real change will be with the next generation who are already much more socially conscious. They care about the issues that my generation and above were never really very aware of or weren't very conscious about. And, you know, when we talk about the purple pound, the spending power of disabled people is worth £274 billion to the UK economy. Let's just say if anyone in business is listening to this, like, you're in business to make money, why would you not want to serve disabled consumers? And I always give the example that, you know, I'm the height of a 4-year-old. I can't buy clothes for a 4-year-old. I have boobs and I have a big bum. They just don't fit me, but I still buy clothes. So even though there's nothing out there that meets my needs, I still have to spend that money somewhere. Yeah. Wouldn't I rather want to spend it with an organization that values my money, that meets my needs? So that's why I'm launching this app, because it's a win-win situation.
Yeah.
Businesses are now waking up to the fact that they're excluding disabled consumers and there's money to be made, but also we're really underserved. 75% of disabled people have walked away from a shop or a business because it's been a poor experience. So it's a win-win for businesses, but also for us as consumers as well.
Do you think there's a link here? Because the disabled community, when they go for an employment, as you stated the figures, and they look past them because of their disability, so you haven't got many in a traditional workplace when there should be. And then also there's an uneducated factor when it comes to catering for the disabled community. A small amount of the disabled community in the workplace. So if there was, that education would be there and they would be able to voice that they're missing out on business. Do you think the uneducated are unwilling to take the risk because they don't know what's out there?
Yeah, you know, it's very common knowledge that loads of businesses and organizations are really missing out on the untapped pool that is disabled talent. But then it's not as black and white as that, though. Just because you might have disabled people in your organization, the burden isn't on them to educate the entire organization. They've been employed to do a job.
Yeah.
And what we also find is that people expect that free labor off those diverse groups. They say, well, if you want this, then you'll do it for free, won't you? That's not fair, especially those that live with non-visible conditions and impairments. It's really difficult to decide whether you want to share that you have a condition or an impairment or not with your employer, because 9 times out of 10, you probably will be treated differently, or there's the assumption of that. But what I say to organizations is, if you're not actively inviting and welcoming and really understanding the needs of your disabled employees, then you've got a workforce that are more focused on hiding who they are rather than focusing on the job in hand. As an employer, I would much rather people be comfortable at work, be who they are, ask me for any adjustments that they need and I'll provide them, and just get on with the job that I've hired you to do. And also, I have to talk about access to work. There's up to £70,000 per year of funding that the government has for disabled people. I have to caveat this by saying it's very difficult to get. There are a long waiting list out there, but this is the government's best kept hidden secret. So yes, employers might think that it might be costly, but the average adjustment costs around £35. If you're not willing to spend £35 to help remove barriers for someone to get into work, then what are you doing, mate?
Leads me to a question I wanted to ask, which is really sort of stepping into the whole idea of box ticking. People go, well, there's so much diversity out there now because, they have, there are laws and regulations about the
Yeah.
percentages in every form you fill in now. You've got to tick what
Yeah.
your background is and what your if you are diverse in any way, whether it be racially, whether it be sexually, you've got to tick all these boxes about your gender and who you identify with. And it's all about this box ticking. Is it helping or is it hindering the cause?
In the long run, it's going to help, because if you don't know how you measure up as an organization, how do you know what inequalities your workforce are facing? From an organizational perspective, how will you know where to invest your money to make things better for your workforce if you don't know who they are? So I get it. Like, I know it can be really off-putting for employees, but from an organizational perspective, that data and that insight is priceless, but there are ways of doing it. So first of all, if you're not building trust, no one's going to be honest with you. Your employees won't feel comfortable telling you their most personal parts of their identity. And that's why there's always the option to also say, I prefer not to say. And that's totally fine if you want to tick that box too. This information is anonymized unless it's like a really small organization and you're a really diverse person, and let's say an external company isn't dealing with the data, then I think it will probably be able to be traced back.
Yeah.
So that's why it's really important to make sure an impartial company does this work, to make sure that you're telling people why you're asking for this information, how it's going to be used, what you're going to do with it, and who has access to it. And look, I can't tell you how soul destroying it has been for me when people have said to me, "You only got that job because you're disabled."
Oh, are they kind of saying it's tokenism?
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
my God. It's soul destroying, because
Well, they say
I
you
really
haven't got the
struggled
talent
to
for
enter the
one.
workforce. Like, I had to apply for over 100 jobs before removing any mention of my condition or impairment, and then I got an interview straight away. I've worked my ass off for everything to get to where I am. As a person from a South Asian community, you're told from a young age you have to work harder than your white counterparts. And then as a disabled person, we know that we have to work harder and overcompensate than our non-disabled counterparts. And then as a woman, I know I'm probably going to be paid less than my male counterparts. So can you imagine, like, the layers of oppression that I've had to face, and then someone goes and says that to me? It's not cool. It's not okay.
What blows me away though is that you can almost divide the world into two types of people: those that get crushed by injustice and those who go, well, fuck you, and we're going to take this up, and I'm going to. You've got such a positive, buoyant attitude towards it all that it's like, yeah, this is how it's been, and I'm going to change it. I really respect that.
Thank you. But I think that's why I'm doing the work that I'm doing now, because I know what I've had to go through. I don't think it was right or fair, but I don't want others to go through it. So if there's anything that I can do now to change that, that's literally what I am on a mission to do. But not just because it's going to benefit us in our community. That in the long run, it will benefit everybody. And I want to give an example of that. We all know, as disabled people, through the pandemic, how quick changes can be made, really, but
Yeah.
only when the change is going to be perceived to benefit the majority. Are you telling me that disabled people didn't want to work remotely pre-pandemic?
It's absolutely right. The second it affects the able-bodied community, it's like, oh, well, we can do it, and no worries. Yeah.
Oh my God, it's so frustrating. Like, let's be really honest. That there's a million disabled people that can and want to work right now, but because of the stigma that exists in employing disabled people, sadly, they're probably gonna fall into poverty. And how do you get out of poverty? It's based on your capability to work. So it's this horrible, vicious cycle that keeps going round and around and around. And then layer on top of that everyone thinks the government gives you everything. And if you're disabled, everyone thinks you're rolling in it. But of course, that couldn't be further from the truth.
So why do you think that people don't hire disabled people?
There's a number of reasons. Largely, let's talk about the representation of disabled people. Like, on screen, we usually see disabled people only talking about disability issues. And that, for me, myself as a broadcaster, I'm really trying hard to not get pigeonholed into that. But equally, I'm very aware of the fact that we never see disabled people of colour on our screens either. So I'm always torn between saying yes to those opportunities that include disability because we also need that representation. But I'm also struggling also not to get pigeonholed into only talking about disability. We barely see any disabled people. We barely see accurate portrayal of disabled people and our lives. Personally, my opinion is the perception of disability in the UK is that everyone thinks you're a benefit cheat or everyone thinks you just want to be a Paralympian. And if you think about like why, because those are the stories that we see.
My wife watches Silent Witness, and so that means I watch Silent Witness. But there's something I've loved about the way they've gone about representation, and it's something we talked about this on the show a few weeks ago about The Apprentice when they did their inclusivity film things that they were doing, and it was just so in your face. This person has a wheelchair, therefore they can't climb a side, and sad face. So it was just really cringe. The opposite is like what Silent Witness do, where they've had wheelchair users. They currently have a deaf person is one of the key characters in it, but they don't make a big deal about it. They sign and they communicate.
Yeah.
But it's not like it feels like so often in media, it's like, and here's our gay representative, and here's our person of color representative, and here's our disabled representative, and they string all this together. It feels very forced and very pushed. I like that in Silent Witness, it's very much this is just a person who they are.
Are they trying to ask for a tap on the back for including a minority? Is it more? Do you think it feels like that? Like here's our gay person or here's our disabled person, and they're kind of expecting, oh, well done for getting them on. It smacks of I don't know.
Think it comes back to the box ticking as well. It's almost like, and here you can see we've done this now.
Yeah,
box ticks.
Where's my medal?
On,
You've hit the nail on the head. That's what we need to see. We just need to see more incidental portrayal of everybody that lives in our society. You can tell when something's really tokenistic, like let's say it's a storyline about disability, it will just be about someone's condition and impairment, but there's so much more to us than that. Like when people try and meet my needs, they only ever come at it from a disability perspective. But what about my cultural needs as a South Asian? What about my needs as a woman? All of that never gets even a look in. And that's why I always say that inclusion has to be intersectional. Like I can't wake up tomorrow and decide I'm going to leave the fact that I'm a South Asian at the door. My skin is brown and people judge me and treat me a certain way as a result of that. Sometimes positive, sometimes negative, sometimes indifferently. I kind of never know. But like that's the unique way in which I experience the world, and that's who I am. But when we don't see that, when that isn't celebrated, that's why we as disabled people aren't confident. That's why we don't take up space when we need to. That's why we don't know how to. And I think that just all comes back to this point of why representation is so important. Growing up, I never saw disabled people on my TV unless it was children in need.
Do you think there is a misperception by the media companies of what their actual audience want? The fact that they'll bring on a disabled person, and it's like you said, you don't want to be pigeonholed, but I'm sure you're kind of something's trying to push you towards that.
I think that's the expectation, though, isn't it, of our community? Because people think that that's all we do is wallow in self-pity and just fight an inaccessible society. And like I do that. I try not to wallow in self-pity, but I definitely fight this inaccessible society. But I do loads of other things as well. And that's what's missing. From a broadcaster's perspective, they do have quotas, they do have targets. Sometimes they won't get production budget if something isn't diverse, or they do have obligations to meet in addition then to whatever their shareholders want them to do in some cases. So yeah, there are lots of different things that are pulling the strings. If their approach to inclusion is to be as intersectional as possible, then they can't go wrong. I think people are making this a much more complicated thing than it needs to be. But when you think of like who are the decision makers, Do they reflect the society that we live in? Are any of them disabled? How diverse are any of their teams? That's a large reason of why these challenges are still existing.
It seems like an unclimbable mountain. I mean, I can't imagine that you've got to fight against this for the most basic things. And it's almost like it's embedded in the foundations. And when you do get a little bit of, you push in the right direction, you find that it's almost not genuine because it's kind of a tick box or it's tokenism.
I agree.
But how do you change it? How do you just keep on chipping away? And do you think it will ever change to an acceptable point?
That's such a good question. I don't think that in my lifetime I will ever see the change that I'm really trying to create and advocate for. And I've kind of had to come to terms and peace with that. Because I could easily ignore it all and just really do what I want to do, which is to go and live in a hot country and just live out my days like that. I can't ignore it. And especially because in my community, disability faces an even further sense of stigma. I feel like I have so much more work to do there. We don't even have the language to talk about disability in my community. All the words that we have are really derogatory. If we don't have the language, that means no one's talking about it.
I spoke to a lady who was from an African country. I can't remember which it was, but she was autistic, and she was saying that where she comes from, she's considered to be like demon possessed, and
exactly
goes into a whole new realm of ableism, I guess, in that you're not just differently abled. You don't just face challenges in certain aspects of your life. What you're actually facing is you're evil, and you've got to be cast out from Satan's grasp as well, which is just like far out,
Yeah, we could probably do a whole different conversation on this alone, but I was told that I must have done something bad in my past life. That's why I was born with my condition. This was said to me at a really young age, and I sat there and I thought, I wonder what I did then. Was I a murderer? I should never have been made to feel that way.
What kind of guilt would that be to place on a kid?
I felt so guilty. And then I grew up and I was like, F that. Like, I don't even know if I believe in past lives, and I'm having to sit here with the burden of other people saying that to me. Like, that's not cool. So, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done in lots of different communities. And that's why I think that we have to understand that there are groups of disabled people that have so much privilege as well. And privilege isn't a fixed thing. Like, in some situations, I have it, and in some, I don't. Having British citizenship for me is a privilege, because if I was born in India, I'll probably be in an orphanage by now. At the moment, I'm living my ancestors' wildest dreams, but because I am a British citizen, and then that really plays with my head, because I'm only here because of colonialism. And again, that's a whole other issue we could talk about. But doesn't this just go to show that the more nuanced stories are, the more interesting that they are? And that's why we need much more accurate portrayal of everybody's lives.
Real stories to come out, real, not in the X Factor, here's the sob story part of the thing where everyone gets the tissues out. And it's just a real way of this is just life.
I wanted to ask, in fact, I asked both of you, do you find that the disabled community has gone almost stagnant due to other crises that have happened? We were making steps in the right direction, but because of things that have happened, take your pick, the pandemic, poverty, the boats that they've manufactured, culture wars. Do you find that every time that something comes up like that, suddenly the disabled movement for improvement in their everyday lives gets pushed back?
Yeah, definitely. And let's be honest, the current party in power are masters at the art of distraction. We have to understand a bit of the history here. So it was illegal to discriminate people on their gender and their ethnicity 20 and 30 years before it was illegal to discriminate people based on disability. We've never been on an equal footing. We've always been playing catch up from the very beginning. And look at the fight that we had just to even get that, right, to make that law, the Disability Discrimination Act. So I think we always have to look at where this started and where we came from. The Equality Act 2010 is very black and white. It's not really very social model. It's very medicalized and it fails a lot of people. And it's very difficult to bring people to account. Whereas in America, I rarely feel disabled because everybody acts out of compliance because the culture there is to sue people very quickly and easily. We don't have that here in the UK. Disability has never been a priority issue, even though if you weren't born with a condition, you're a pre-disabled person because 83% of disabled people were born as non-disabled people. That baffles my head so much. I regularly sit here and think, why are non-disabled people not designing for their own future selves? Look at the millions of people that are living with long COVID overnight. We don't have good representation of our lives. That like, everything comes back to representation for me. If we really understood the real lived experiences and lives of disabled people. It's being called a human rights crisis by the UN. But again, our government likes to ignore all of that stuff.
I think it's why, it's to wrap this up, I really think it's why the I Matter movement that Disability Expo are putting forward matters so much, pun not intended, but it's so important that this sort of stuff's out there. I think the message of I Matter is exactly that. It's like, why do we matter? And it's not, why do disabled people matter now? It's why do I matter? And like you say, people who are pre-disabled, who, you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. You don't know what accident's going to happen. You don't know what circumstances are going to be presented. Preparing for a world where we are not just accepting, but celebrating difference and diversity in that way, whether it, in whatever fashion it is. That includes disability. I think it's just so important. And that's why the I Matter movement is so important,
I think something, though, that hinders the progress of disabled people and representation of us is that sometimes when some disabled people do get opportunities, whether they be high profile or not, then it's always all about just them. And I understand there might be briefs for this to be about your own lived experience, but you're taking up such valuable space and you're holding that space for the whole community. And yes, that might be a great personal achievement and personal gain for you, but it matters more to us as a community at whole. And I'm not saying that every disabled person is representing the whole community. Like I would never want to do that, but we have to understand the privilege and the honor that it is to hold that space when we are so excluded. We are over excluded. So what I would urge people to do is just to remember that the next time they're asked to do something, or to remember the next time they're asked to speak, to be in the media, remember what this is really about. Try not to just make it all about yourself. We're a community. If we really want things to change, the change is only going to come when it's seen to benefit everybody. It's not difficult, but we just have to be less individualistic about it.
I think that falls along the realms of don't pull the ladder up once you've got there, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a really good analogy. I love that. Shani, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. Your insights have just been so valuable. I've learned so much just having this brief conversation with you. If people want to reach out to you, where can they do so?
I'm at Shani Dhanda on all socials, and my website is shanidhanda.com.
Fantastic. We'll put the links in the description. You're also going to be at Disability Expo coming up?
I am, yeah.
Fantastic. We look forward to seeing you there. Isn't she amazing? I don't know about you, but I got so much out of that and learned so much just from talking to Shani. As I say, all the links will be in the description for how to get in contact with Shani, and especially if you're interested in being a funder for the app, please do go and get in touch with her. Please do go hit like, hit subscribe and ring the bell. You'll always know when new content's coming up. You'll also be helping me hit that 10K mark, which is a huge thing for me, and I really want to get there. Please do leave comments as well. We'd love to hear from you. If there's anything you'd like to pass on to Shani, we'll make sure it gets through to her. But I'd really like to hear your experiences of representation and any experiences that you've had. So if you've got anything to say, please do put it in the comments. I will see you again on the next episode. But in the meantime, please do stay safe.